He saw an industry that looked ripe for disruption, an area where consumers could be more conveniently served. He found people who were building the product he wanted to see, and then he inserted himself into the story, front and center. He poured gasoline on the fire. He didn't care about collateral damage. He didn't care about the effect on workers. They'd all be robots soon enough anyway. He didn't care about regulations. Political power can be paid for, and if he was successful, he'd soon be big enough to buy the regulations that served his interests. Eventually, his brash demeanor and personal faults led to his ousting, but not before an industry was forever changed. Anyone know the company that I'm talking about? It's Uber. And that brash CEO? Travis Kalanick. Travis is the subject of today's discussion, and I'm going to tell you why his latest effort with ghost kitchens might replace Uber as the biggest change he unleashed on society, whether we like it or not. Ready? Let's go.
Wouldn't it be?
Alright, so we can argue all we want about the effects of Uber on society at large. My personal 2 cents? The elimination of low-wage driving work was already inevitable with the development of autonomous driving technologies. But Uber definitely accelerated that trend and did little to nothing to help the drivers that would be hurt most by that transition. Basically, I think their business model was incredible in its foresight and strategy, but their business structure rewarded only capital and consumers at the expense of labor. Good for consumers, good for capitalists, bad for drivers. You might disagree with that assessment, but I think we can all agree Uber was incredibly successful at disrupting the transportation industry. Now I'm going to try this intro again. He saw an industry that looked ripe for disruption, an area where consumers could be more conveniently served. He found people who were building the product he wanted to see, and then he inserted himself into the story, though in the background instead of front and center. He poured gasoline on the fire. He didn't care about collateral damage. He didn't care about the effect on workers. They'd all be robots soon enough anyway. He didn't care about small businesses. Their loyalty can be paid for. And if he was successful, he'd soon be big enough to make their cooperation completely unnecessary. His brash demeanor and personal faults may still exist, but this time, he's smart enough to fly under the radar instead of in your face. Anyone know the company that I'm talking about? It's called City Storage Systems, and the brash CEO, Travis Kalanick. This bland name hides what's underneath, a company that contains 2 concepts called future foods and cloud kitchens. It's a ghost kitchen concept that is going to change the way we eat. Fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. So let's dive in. Ghost kitchens. What are they? Let me share a clip from a great YouTube video that explains the concept better than I can. I'll also link to the full video in the description.
The actual story here is that the Mr. Beast burger restaurant chain exists without actually existing. That's because it offers its food exclusively through delivery apps. And because of that, it launched with 300 locations. Let me repeat that. On day 1, 300 Mr. Beast burger locations sprung up across the United States. Folks, that is insane. For reference, In-N-Out has only 342 locations, and it took them more than 66 years to reach that milestone. How? How on earth does someone launch a restaurant chain with hundreds of locations like that? And is it actually gonna work? Is this a trend that we should expect to see more of in the restaurant industry? Now, despite the name, a ghost kitchen isn't actually some kind of haunted, spooky restaurant, which, gotta say, kinda disappointing. Basically, ghost kitchens are existing kitchens that will, for a fee, prepare the items for a virtual brand's menu. Here's an example to help you illustrate. Let's say that you're a manager of, pick a random restaurant here, Buca de Beppo. You've got yourself a huge huge commercial kitchen ready to pump out a ton of family-style Italian-American meals at a moment's notice, but your staff is just standing around with little to do because there's no dine-in customers in the midst of a pandemic. Then, one day Mr. Beast shows up with a solution to all your problems. He wants to pay Buca di Beppo to prepare Mr. Beast burgers, seeing as how your kitchen and staff aren't operating at full capacity. This way, he doesn't have to build an actual brick-and-mortar restaurant, and your kitchen staff stays busy all day by operating as a ghost kitchen for Mr. Beast Burger. So Mr. Beast supplies the menu and the burger ingredients, your kitchen staff prepares the online orders as they roll in, and then third-party delivery apps like Postmates and DoorDash take the burgers to customers in the area. Mr. Beast gets a cut, you get a cut, the delivery app gets a cut. At the end of the day, it's a win-win-win. Everyone is happy.
Sorry, that was a little long, but it's a really good video and a really good explanation. So, that was about Mr. Beast, a YouTube personality. But we're talking about Travis Kalanick and his efforts with city storage systems. So what is Travis Kalanick doing? Everything I'm going to tell you is from this great article in Vice by Emily Friedlander called The Mysterious Case of the Fucking Good Pizza. I'll link to it in the description and recommend reading it in full. Basically, Travis bought himself a majority stake of city storage systems for $150 million and made himself CEO, similar to his insertion to Uber. But here, the innocuous name City Storage Systems hides two brands, Future Foods and Cloud Kitchens. And these two brands together run one of the most ambitious ghost kitchen concepts out there. It's fascinating the way they've taken advantage of the pandemic to, as someone in the article put it, insert a Trojan horse virus deep into the fabric of the restaurant industry. Here's an excerpt from Friedlander's piece. Labed said that a sales rep from Future Foods had approached him in fall of 2020, asking if he would be interested in checking out some of its virtual restaurant concepts. They sent him a selection of menus centered around the sort of items that Devils was already making, and Labed went through them with his kitchen staff, ticking down the list to determine which items they'd be able to easily produce. Once he'd customized an initial collection of 4 menus and was ready to start cooking, Future Foods took care of the rest, setting up virtual storefronts for the brands on sites like DoorDash and Postmates and marketing them online, often through promotions on delivery platforms. This makes Future Foods' portfolio less like a collection of brands in the usual sense than a store of digital marketing assets, or skins, that restaurants can use to showcase their usual offerings in a different light. So think about that. He's offering restaurants an opportunity. Work with him and he'll reskin your restaurant so that it can use the same ingredients to expand their offerings. Not just different items, but through different brands. Brand with names like Fucking Good Pizza, or Big Hot Dog Energy, or a noodle place called Send Nudes. He's building for a generation of consumers that lives on their phones, that lives through memes. The big thing Travis Kalanick realized at Uber? He realized drivers weren't a stakeholder worth prioritizing. He saw the trend towards driverless cars, and he knew that drivers were increasingly becoming a commodity. He exploited that understanding and the drivers themselves to build Uber as an undeniable market leader in the transportation space. Here, he's on to a similar thesis. Travis realizes that traditional mom-and-pop restaurants aren't going to exist. He sees the trend towards delivery apps, convenience, and personalized advertising that is going to dominate the food industry. Other than for a niche, high-end market, food and food preparation is becoming more and more of a commodity. He's exploiting that understanding, and the restaurants themselves, to make City Storage Systems the market leader in the mass dining space. Let me give you another excerpt from the Friedlander article. A world in which delivery app users find themselves scrolling through dozens of virtual concepts may have downsides for restaurants too. Ultimately, it gives people the paradox of choice, said Matt Newberg, founder of the subscription media startup Hungry, which covers emerging trends at the intersection of food and technology. But, he says, it also makes it incredibly more competitive. The more brands there are to choose from, the less likely the consumer is to click on any individual storefront. As the New York Times has also pointed out, it's also easy to imagine a future where virtual brand companies with money to spend on prime placement in delivery app search results push independent restaurants lower and lower down the list. Think about it. Imagine a world where you open up any food delivery app and are inundated with personalized offers from brands that seem like they are made for your particular interests. How is an independent restaurant operating on its own to survive in that sea of noise? It'll be more frustrating than Tom Hanks trying to make fire in Castaway. Look, these restaurants are trading short-term survival for long-term irrelevance. Not to mention, Kalanick's leveraging a big data approach that is bound to win in the long run. With each restaurant he partners with, he gets all their order flow data. With each user that places orders with one of his brands, he sees their preferences. Another excerpt from the Friedlander article. When you partner with Future Foods, you're signing up to participate in what is essentially a massive experiment on the restaurant landscape. In addition to helping the company to market test the concepts in their portfolio, local restaurants using Otter to consolidate their orders in one place are granting the company backdoor access to valuable information on consumer preferences in your town, information that cloud kitchens could leverage down the road to compete with local restaurants from its own kitchens. Think about that. It's only a matter of time before Travis and City Storage Systems has the data to outcompete any independent restaurant in a physical or virtual dining experience. It sounds like the beginning of a Black Mirror episode, and I shudder to imagine some of the more dystopian ways this could end up. Look, maybe I'm too pessimistic. Dan Turan wrote a post called The Beginning of the End that outlines a more optimistic case for the survival of the restaurant space. I'll link to that below. But I don't know. I want to make more concerted efforts to support independent restaurants. But when I said I wanted to support drivers, all that meant was switching to Lyft from Uber. Tomato, tomato. But even if I'm right and this trend is inevitable, I can't help thinking, wouldn't it be awesome if Travis learned a lesson from his experience with Uber? Wouldn't it be awesome if he didn't just exploit the independent restaurants that signed up for his service? Wouldn't it be awesome if he instead gave the restaurants equity in his efforts, made them capital and not just labor? Let me try to explain what I mean here. Uber is currently worth $107 billion. Their drivers have been a critical component to their success. Without drivers signing up to doggedly work for this new concept, Uber couldn't have worked. But Uber has always treated their drivers really poorly, in my opinion. I read one report that only 4% of Uber drivers are still on the platform a year later. That's really low, but it's not surprising that there's huge churn amongst drivers. They don't get paid well, they're incentivized to work more and more, and they don't get benefits. The idea of this Uber driver as a side hustle is largely a myth. In fact, a huge percentage of Uber drivers in the places I've lived all have business cards and try to use Uber as a customer acquisition tool, where they try to convert riders like me into direct customers outside the app. In fact, every place I've lived, I've had a driver that takes me to the airport that I just pay in cash and we both agree on a price, since Uber takes a 30% cut, and it just makes my life easier whenever I'm doing airport rides. It's funny because Uber initially started to disrupt the black car service, and now that business model is coming full circle where these drivers themselves are using Uber as a way to build their black car business. Anyways, by my estimates, they had less than 30,000 drivers in 2013. And to give you some context, at the time Uber went public, $1,000 worth of equity at the seed stage was worth $5 million, a 5,000x return. But I'm not even going to use this seed stage valuation. I'm talking about 2013, where they had raised their Series C, or their fourth round of financing, and they were valued at $4 billion. So if each of those 30,000 drivers had, in addition to their wages, earned, let's call it $5,000 in equity over the course of the year, that $5,000 would have turned into a payday of $125,000 when Uber went public in 2018. Now, I'm not talking about making millionaires here, but $125,000 is more than 3 full years worth of wages for most of these drivers. That's a meaningful difference in their lives. It would have given some small percentage of drivers a significant payday for their early commitment to a fledgling platform. It would have engendered much more loyalty from drivers, perhaps reducing Uber's problem with churn. It's not like anything like this would meaningfully affect the astronomical outcomes for Travis and his peers. All it means is slicing the pie differently so that there's a slice for the powerful early adopters that make the flywheel turn so successfully. Anyways, obviously they didn't have to do it. No driver has any leverage, just like no restaurant that works with city storage systems has any leverage. But sometimes it's not about what you have to do. It's about doing something better. And Travis has that opportunity now with city storage systems. It's too late for any 5,000x paydays. But still, he can offer restaurants some meaningful upside for contributing the most important part of his eventual success. They're not just contributing to actual food, they're contributing the data that will eventually allow his company to be successful. These restaurants are contributing incredible value, and they aren't reaping any of the long-term benefits simply because they aren't valued by those with the power. But these restaurants and these restaurant owners deserve more. Look, if they are all unknowingly digging their own graves, shouldn't they at least be able to profit off the cemeteries they're building? Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do subscribe to follow along when new episodes are released.
Wouldn't it be